Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the American Society of Landscape Architects Emerging Professionals Committee Ask Me Anything event. We're very excited to be back with you. We have a great guest today who's going to be full of information. I'm sure a lot of you are excited to hear from him. Again, I'm joined by several of the Emerging Professional Committee members. I'm Daniel Martin from Permalot Corporation. I sit on the committee. Also with me we have Chelsea Keat, the National Student Representative to ASLA, who sits on the committee, and Amy Severson, a landscape architect at Land Collective. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Amy and let her introduce our very special guest, Brad McKee. Amy?
All right, thanks, Daniel. Brad has been the editor of LAM since April 2010, when he joined ASLA and began a total redesign of the magazine during its 100th year. Before coming to LAM, he worked as a freelance writer for 10 years, including 6 years as a contract reporter for the New York Times. He was also a contributing editor to Architect and ID magazines during that period, and worked for several years part-time at a Maryland nursery. His design journalism career began in 1993, when he joined the magazine Architecture, where he eventually became a senior editor and then editor-at-large until the magazine closed in 2006. In 1992, he began reporting for the weekly Washington City paper and served as the paper's arts editor from 1997 to 2000. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks very much.
There we go.
Wondered about arriving at the right place. You have.
Beautiful new edition of Landscape Architecture magazine.
Yeah, that's our May issue.
All right, Brad, we are going to get started with questions.
All right.
We have kind of some... Ask you anything?
Yeah, just about.
All right. We've got some standard questions that we typically ask all of our participants. We had to modify them slightly for you because mostly we're talking to landscape architects. But let's dive right in.
All right.
First question. If you could go back and tell your younger self one thing, what advice would you give yourself?
One thing I would tell my younger self, I think the major thing I would tell myself was don't try so hard to write so well. And by that I mean write, when you're younger, you try a lot to make every single sentence be really strong. Pick up that you should choose strong verbs and strong phrasing, strong everything, and I think I would tell my younger self to keep the writing much more simple, much more clear and to the point, and don't be such a show-off.
Good advice.
Yep.
Have you taken it?
I have. I mean, along with that, I would say, I would tell younger people, and I do frequently, write the way you talk, not the way you write, because talk to your typewriter, talk to your keyboard. It's a really hard thing to get people to do. It only comes with practice, I think, or unusually clear thinking, which not even I possess. But I really think it takes a while for people to relax in front of a keyboard when they feel the stakes are high and something is going into print or online. And I always try to tell people, especially when they're talking about difficult topics, and I don't think this is terribly exotic advice, to write it like you would in an email to a relative who's not, or a friend who's not in the profession, in this case, or in whatever profession you're in. Actually, I think the advice applies broadly.
Excellent. All right, we're going to let Chelsea ask our number 2 question. You got that, Chelsea?
All right. Hi, Chelsea.
Hi. So, what are the top 5 things you would tell someone who's interested in a career in landscape architecture?
The top 5 things? Oh my, that's hard. Okay, the top 5, I would say, oh boy, I'm going to get... I've never pursued a career in landscape architecture, but I would... oh boy, that's a hard one. I would say read a lot, read widely, read inside and outside of landscape architecture, for sure. Make sure, and this is still part of the first piece of advice, make sure you get a lot of humanities, get a lot of history, get a good deal of politics and public affairs. I often think if there's anything the design world suffers from, it would be an insularity from kind of current events and being engaged in those events. I think that's less of a problem in landscape architecture than it is in architecture, frankly. But I guess then also I would, and these aren't kind of like central to the core of landscape architecture so much, but I would get involved in public affairs. I would think of yourself as an advocate. If you're working unless you're working on private residential designs only, which you probably won't be, I would say just plan to get involved in the public realm in general, whether it involves design or whether it involves policy or community affairs in any sense, really. And we're talking about rights to public space, stuff like that. Things that happen at the community level really affect the way regions work, cities work, states work. So top 5 things. Okay, so those 2. The others, I guess, would be I left out art education in the first one. I think it's incredibly important to be in tune with all the arts and culture, not just fine art, painting, drawing, printmaking. Also now we have digital arts, digital media. I think just having being conversant in those areas can only help you in this field. I don't personally myself pursue digital arts so much, but I do read about them enough to know that they would be important in landscape architecture. And also, you're obviously going to get a landscape education, so I would just say, plan to know a lot about ecology and sociology, and that's 3. The other 2 things, learn how to do business. I think it really is important some people are naturally good business people. We've seen that whiz kids in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, or in somebody's garage in Wisconsin, comes up with a brilliant idea and turns it into a $1 billion proposition or more. But there's nothing like seeing it done right. There's nothing like watching a prudent business person make it happen and make it last. So I think that's a lot of what the internship is for before you get the exam. The seat time that you get during your internship outside of the academic studio is to show you how a business is run, how professionalism happens, how politics are dealt with in real time in business, how budgets are made, people are paid, and so forth. There's no replacement for that. I'm going to say that's 4 now, right? I may be double counting to 3.
Yeah.
The 5th one, I don't know. The 5th one, I'm going to think of this later. It's funny. Lists are a little funny. I would just network as much as possible, actually. I think you also really need to figure out what kind of person you are. You may not know that when you're first starting out, but don't feel like you should be one kind of person when you really feel like another. In other words, you may wish to work alone and be a sole practitioner. You may love being part of a bigger team and a bigger interdisciplinary team. Just because you prefer one doesn't, sometimes we feel like we're never doing the right thing. I think young professionals feel that insecurity a lot in general, but I would just say really just kind of listen to your gut, which I know sometimes is silly advice. If I knew what my gut were telling me, I wouldn't be asking it. But I would figure out in what situation you work best. I didn't always work best in a big rattling newsroom filled with distraction, but I also did not like working in my own home office for 10 years by the end of that. I just thought it was too isolating, and I really liked the contact with people, hour by hour and day by day. So this situation here with 6 of us on staff at the magazine dealing with a hub and spoke system kind of all of these different contributors around the country, around the world, is really kind of perfect for me, in myself. So that just as an example of, I'm 50 years old now, so I guess as of 6 years ago I finally found the milieu. But I also had it in my 20s when I worked at Architecture Magazine, and we were an office of about 15, which was also a really nice fit. So I think just finding kind of what kind of environment and culture for work you can groove with is a really important thing, and will result in a much more satisfying career.
Excellent. That's good advice. Get to know yourself, and when you do what you love.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back to one of our initial 6 questions. And ask who or what has had the biggest impact on your career.
Who or what has had the biggest impact on my career? Well, a lot of people have. I've had a lot of really great colleagues, sources over the years who have become friends in many cases, and mentors. I would say the person who made the biggest difference is David Carr, who was my boss at Washington City Paper. David died a year ago, February. He was the media equation columnist for the New York Times. He was my editor at Washington City Paper. He had, to make a long story short, he basically taught me everything I cherish about being a good journalist, and more importantly, being a good boss, and being a good colleague. And it really just all boils down to simple human decency. I mean, there are a lot of jerks in journalism, and in the political world, and people, my friends who work in that world, deal with a lot of people who you really don't want to spend that much time with. But David really taught all of us who came up under him at City Paper just how to be more humane in going about journalism, and that it wasn't always about going for the kill, that sometimes journalism many times involved kindness, fairness, always involved fairness, and really seeing around corners, and being able to get to know the things you don't know, and realizing what those things are that you don't know, and figuring out whether you will ever know them, and also just taught just plain old empathy.
All right,
that's David.
All right. Toss over to Amy.
Okay, sure. So, here we go. Oh, so we're wondering, in your letter to the editor in the May issue of LAM, you asked people to send their thoughts on how landscape architects can deal with homelessness.
Yes.
So how will you use that information?
Well, we'll do a couple things. One is we're going to take it in, first of all, and see what we get. I hope we get something. I've gotten a couple things. I hope more responses will come in. There are a couple of well-known, sort of designers well-known for their focus in this area. Off the bat, I can think of Carol Mayer Reed in particular, but there are others. And what I want to do is see what comes in, and then we also have Rebecca Leonard has written a piece for us on kind of, I don't want to say the do's and don'ts, but the things you need to be aware of as a landscape architect when you're working in the public realm around homelessness. I don't think by any means, I think I probably said this in the piece, that I don't think by any means a homelessness problem is landscape architecture's alone to solve. Far from it. But I do think that whatever you do in the public realm, you've got to know the ecology of that realm. And I think as critical right now as the disparity between wealth and poverty is right now, I think you really have to be aware that what you do all your actions have reactions in the public realm, and that you don't want to make them worse by any means. And I think designers may have some ideas, but I want us to share those ideas among each other as a community of designers, and figure out what the aggregate of those ideas is, so that we get kind of a round perspective on how what landscape architects do affects the the homeless population. And again, the homeless population comes in all sizes, shapes, colors, and types. There are the long-term homeless. There are the more transient homeless, people who are just kind of one, as they say, car payment away from poverty, who may not be homeless for long, but they're there for now. And especially where children and families are concerned, I think that is a real critical issue to pay attention to. But amenities in the public realm. I mean, we've done so much to, and I don't want to go on myself. I want ideas to be generated by our readers, but I can, some of the easy grabs are making sure there are services. I think public drinking fountains and public toilets are really important. I wish we could find some way to make sure more cities had public showering facilities, places to park, but also advocate for things that don't penalize the homeless for being homeless and for being poor. And that's all I'm going to say about that for now, about the specifics. But what we plan to do with those things is I really want to find a way, and we will. It'll be simple enough. We could just strip them in the magazine one day, but we need to find a framework over time to kind of, I hope to keep up kind of a drumbeat on homelessness, and not turn every landscape architect into a homelessness advocate, but to at least get that into the filters of designers so that they're aware of it and they don't ignore it above all.
Great. Kind of follow up to that, I know along those lines, you are always sort of an advocate for landscape architects to kind of be a change agent in society and things in the world, particularly around the environment. I see the Dredge Fest poster behind you, that kind of thing. So with the ever increasing opportunity,
their work, not mine, but we're big fans.
Good. So what do you think the landscape architects could be doing better or more of to be a change agent in the world?
Well, I think they're doing it quite well. I mean, I'm really impressed. I don't want to say more of, just because I'm cautious about saying that, because I'm not sure I know what all they are doing, because we're sitting here in an office in Washington with 6 people, limited time, limited resources, and we know a lot, but we by no means know anywhere near all of it. So what we want to do is just keep our eyes open. But in general, and my message goes to students not least, because I know they're interested and I want to just validate their interest in social issues, in economic issues, in public health, in social health. And I think, as I had said to the undergraduates at the Labash gathering in Columbus, I think the very least you should do is just be aware of these layers of social issues, social challenges and problems in the places you're working, because nothing will make any design fail faster than obliviousness to it, which we don't see a lot of that, frankly. But more importantly, I think that the awareness of it can enrich the design and enrich the solution, more importantly, and also enrich a community. You still there? I'm seeing Chelsea. Daniel, you've frozen a little. Okay.
Oh, is Daniel frozen for the moment?
We may have technical questions at some point, folks. But.
All right, I'm going to toss it to Chelsea for the next question right now.
Okay, so what is the best thing about being the editor of LAM?
I feel very lucky, actually. The best thing is just being the editor of LAM. No, actually, the best thing is given the freedom, the extreme, absolute freedom I'm given in this job to do what I really feel we need to do. And again, I'm not a designer, but I feel like over the last 23 years now, I've been doing design journalism. I feel like I have a good handle on what designers need. So, but the world is changing very quickly. So the most fun part for me is the adventure. And I always use this word a lot because the whole thing is an adventure every day, every week, every month. And it's an adventure because of what all of you out there are doing. Journalism's pretty, it can be exciting. You can land on a big subject. I feel like I've done that. I feel like I found the topic that suits me best. It may be considered niche in the larger world of like environmentalism or whatever, but I really feel like here's where a lot of action goes on, especially a lot of subtle and I would say even unheralded action that makes the world better. Another thing I mentioned in my talk in Columbus was that I have a good friend, my friend Reagan Walker, who gets the magazine every month, and she just said to me unbidden one day that every time she reads our magazine, she feels like there really are people out there making the world a better place. And as familiar as that phrase may sound, I mean, she really meant it, and she really knows the difference from her line of work as a journalist and as kind of she's worked a lot in social causes. And I thought that was the biggest compliment the magazine could get, that this profession could get, actually. Excuse me. So that's the best part, is just knowing that of all the badness out there, there's a lot of goodness. And
all right, are we for?
We do not run across badness much in this profession, honestly. So it's a great place to come in, great profession to walk into every day.
Excellent. Amy, how about the next question?
Sure. So that's really exciting to hear. I think this one is kind of along those lines of dreaming and thinking of the world as a wonderful place. We're wondering if you had a golden ticket to go any place in the world tomorrow, where would you go?
Golden ticket to go anywhere in the world. I'd probably want to go to the Middle East. A nice day in the Middle East. I don't really want to walk into the middle of a war, but I find the Middle East endlessly intriguing. The birth of some of the greatest civilizations, just the landscape, the history, the culture. I'm kind of obsessed with Arab culture, and I would love to be able to go there and, frankly, make sure I got back.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to go right back over to Chelsea.
Chelsea, I'm not hearing you.
Oh, Chelsea's muted.
There we go. How's that?
I hear you.
So, what element of landscape architecture do you find the most refreshing?
What element? I think right now I'd say the element of discovery. I mean, it's not a complacent field by any means. People are really restless in this profession. They see a lot of problems out there, environmental problems in particular. They have for a long time. I mean, this goes way back. But the problems have compounded. They've gotten more complicated. The solutions have gotten more interesting and also more complicated. So, excuse me, I think that's my favorite element, is the element of discovery that's going on, particularly now with the rise of digital media that makes things easier to know, easier to learn. Sometimes that can have its static attached to it, where there's a lot you have to filter away to get to the heart of what you really want to know or what you're aiming to find out. But I think the dynamism and the discovery are my favorite element. And you are, because you're doing it.
So obviously, Landscape Architecture magazine gets very much into the visual elements of landscape architecture. So let's ask the age-old question to you. Hand graphics or computer graphics?
Well, that's a funny question. Just good graphics. I actually am agnostic about hand versus digital, and I think many people are now too. I think people have realized that the two go together very nicely. We see a lot of really beautiful hand rendering. We also see a lot of very beautiful digital rendering. I'm, of course, amazed by the sort of the spatial qualities that digital allows you increasingly as time goes on. But yeah, I'm gonna say, do what you do best, and just make it beautiful.
All right. Make it beautiful. That's perfect. Amy, you have one?
Yes, I do. Okay, so what is the best way to share what landscape architecture is to children and hopefully help some of them become landscape architects someday?
That's a very good question. The eternal question. Um, I think experience is the first thing. It's got to be relatable. And we talk about this a lot here at ASLA, not just at the magazine, but across departments. It's a small but potent profession, and I think people involved really want to make sure it grows beyond them and that it's not misunderstood. So, and also that it is very well understood. So I think making that connection relatable between what children know, which at their age, I'm thinking little kids, like, 7, 8 years old, 9 years old, never too early to say, the park you're playing in was created by someone, and the playground you're playing in was created by someone, and you could be that person creating that. I think that's the easiest entree, but I always think back to Bill Mogridge, who was the head of the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum before his death a couple of years ago. He told me once when I was interviewing him that he believed, and I totally agree, that no kid should really make a career decision until they've had a decent amount of design exposure to the idea of design. And sometimes I think they get that, and it may be a little sideways. I know a lot of kids do get arts education, despite what we hear about the disappearance of arts curricula. But we've always been familiar with the idea of an arts curriculum. But I think even even a limited design unit in an art class, I took mechanical drawing in 10th grade. I think kids get very easily attached to architecture because it's big and bold and heroic, but they don't necessarily realize that landscape is something that can also be made and changed. So I really think just connecting them with what's most familiar is the best way to go about it. But also, I think you got to get there. I mean, we need landscape architects to get into schools from elementary through high school, K through 12, and at whatever level they're operating, try to build the familiarity, try to make that connection between what they see and how it's made.
Do you at the magazine have a specific objective? Use the magazine to raise that public awareness and draw people into the profession?
We do. I always say, now, of course, we don't have a grade school version, but we do have pictures for children to appreciate. No, seriously, I always say, obviously our core group of readers are the 15,000 and change members of ASLA who get the magazine. Beyond that, we have a couple thousand non-member subscribers. But okay, so the landscape architecture profession is our core, and then beyond that, we want to make sure the magazine is comprehensible to the allied professions, which obviously is not that hard: architecture, engineering, planning, even interiors, urban design, and then beyond that, we want to make sure that the magazine appeals, or at least doesn't detract or repel decision makers. We want to make sure that they become intrigued by landscape architecture. So developers, policymakers, town council members, mayors, supervisors, corporate facility people, corporate heads, university deans, department heads, legislators who are funding landscape architecture programs and other programs in state schools, and then comes the general public, who may or may not ever become a landscape architecture client, and not least in that public are, I always say, like the 9th grader who may want to grow up someday to be a landscape architect, and then that 9th grader's parents. We were at USC, Daniel, I believe you were there at breakfast when the student told us that his parents accidentally got his, or by default got his magazine at their home address. And not only did they not think he was crazy anymore, but they thought what he was doing was really cool, and they kind of got it for the first time. If we can do that with a magazine, then we've done our job.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that a lot of people do, I think it could encourage everyone to do, when you're done with the issue, take it to your doctor's office, your dentist's office, your car dealership, wherever they have magazines out on tables that are like 2-year-old people magazines.
Yep.
Leave your landscape architecture magazine there.
I do it myself. Dentist, doctor.
Yep, it can only help.
My barbershop's got a magazine rack.
Perfect. Yep. All right, Chelsea, you got something?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, what common thread links students and emerging professionals when it comes to work-life balance?
Well, students have very little work-life balance. I mean, their work kind of is their life. And that may be true for emerging professionals as well, although you ostensibly, I don't know, and I'd say it's all a matter of control. I was about to say one has more control than the other. I was about to say emerging professionals have more control over their schedule than a student, but in fact, if they're working and doing what they really want to do, they may not. But I really think you've got to force the issue of work-life balance. I know it's always an issue for me and everybody here. The most important thing is to make sure you're doing what you love, by all means. I always feel like my work and my life kind of just flow together really nicely. It doesn't really feel like work. Obviously, some days I just want to go do nothing. But you've got to listen to your and not. I think in this culture, in American culture in particular, in the digital age, there's very little mental rest, and I think you've got to make sure you get that. I mean, I know our leadership here at ASLA makes a big deal of that. To make sure, even though we're all working really hard with limited digital age, there's very little mental rest. And I think you've got to make sure. I'm hearing my own voice feedback to me. I'm sorry. You've got to make sure you enforce a rest period, respite, free time, free form, pleasure, whatever it is that brings you pleasure. Make sure you do it. Ideally, maybe it'll be not in front of a screen, because I do think we all get kind of unwittingly burned out on screen time. I know that by the end of the day, I'm just looking forward to reading words printed on a page.
All right, Amy, you're up.
Okay, so speaking of reading words printed on a page, I guess we were wondering, what is your favorite project or article that you have put into LAM all time?
Oh my goodness, this is tough. I'm as a diplomat, I never play favorites. No, that's a quote from Madeleine Albright. Well, a few that were really important to me were, I know the piece we did on Cornelia Oberlander's project in the Arctic meant a lot to me. It took a lot to get that story done. It highlighted a lot of hidden issues that are not only vital to the people who live in Inuvik, the town on the Barents Sea where she was working, but matter globally. And that is an early warning system for the rest of our globe. What's happening up in the region of permafrost, up in the upper latitudes. I think that was a big one for me. The projects that I think have a lot of sweep mean a lot to me. I mean, I don't mean to play favorites. I love little gardens. I love beautiful small spaces, relatable spaces, but in terms of the issues where you can get a lot done at once and you're looking at a lot of layers at once and it fires on many levels, there was the piece on Scape, on Kate Orff's work, doing the petrochemical industry, the layers of that business down in Louisiana, that has a huge, as she pointed out in her book with Richard Mizrak, had a lot of effect just in American culture, and it's bigger, and she really brought it to light with Richard. And then David Kovacic, the cover story we did on his research. Now, he's an ecologist at the University of Illinois. He may be faculty emeritus. Anyway, he was doing research into how to sink agricultural nutrients from farms in the ground locally so that they don't make it into waterways and create the dead zone at the bottom of the country, below the Mississippi, where the mouth of the Mississippi. That meant an awful lot to me because those chemicals flush into the ecosystem every day and every evening, and worse every time it rains, and into also the Chesapeake Bay and San Francisco Bay and Puget Sound, and we're just flushing this stuff out to feed our nation, to feed other nations. And there may be a way to stop doing that, and we're a long way off from it, but he at least was doing the really hard work to figure out how you could take about 2% of the land around any farm, like 2 acres per 100, and make basically constructed wetlands that would fix the nitrogen and sink the phosphorus. So those 3 stories. We've done other really fun ones. I'm going to stop there for now. I've named 3.
And fairly lots of other ones are amazing to look at, and everybody loves looking at everybody's projects. But what everybody wants to know is, how do they get their own project in LAM? So what are you looking for? What's the most important things that you need to see?
It's a great question. We need to know the project exists, first of all. That is the most important thing. It's so basic. When I first arrived, there was not much of a pipeline of projects coming into the magazine for whatever reason. And I thought maybe they would just start magically flowing in, but they didn't. So it's taken a while, I think, for people to realize, especially when we redesigned the magazine, we may have thrown off people in terms of what they were led to expect the magazine was, and now maybe they didn't know what it was, and were maybe shy of telling us about their work. So we need to know what you're doing, first of all. And we also need to know kind of what's the great part and maybe what's not the not so great part, because honestly, we love beautiful projects where everything worked out really well, but we feel like it's more than just, obviously it's more than just eye candy or, a nature show or something like that. It's more than just pleasure. This is for the magazine is primarily for the profession. And the profession learns when the profession talks to itself, and when people are willing to step up and say what's gone right, but also what's gone wrong with a project. So we want to know what you've learned, more important than anything. I think that's, and it takes guts sometimes for people to come to grips with that and with telling it to people, but really, if you're in the company of other professionals, no one is sitting there going, oh, you really screwed that up. I mean, they're thinking, oh, no, you obviously are learning by learning. And I think, again, going back to discovery and adventure, that is by far the most important thing. A project that appears to be perfect is not very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But also, let me add to that. Not only the design, but, I mean, there are things in practice, construction, and technology that are super interesting that may stand out. So just tell us everything we need to know. I mean, it could be in a couple of pages, but or an email or whatever, or PDF. I mean, when we get PDFs, we get them all the time. To at least in images to look at in some form or other. We need to see it. We need to know what we're looking at. But most often, we just need the contact. We need to know what you're doing and why it matters.
Cool. And what's the best way to get that information to you? Email? Email,
yeah. Email us. All of our email addresses are in the front of the magazine. You can email one of us. You can email, all of us. It comes in all kinds of forms. We often go looking for it, in terms of kind of our own enterprising research. We learn a lot, frankly, just putting out the landscape report, which I want to make a plug for, although everybody who should get it probably gets it. But Kat Katzma puts that together for us every Tuesday and Thursday, and that involves a huge scan by all of us. We all contributed and look out for pieces for that e-newsletter, and that gives us a real daily, weekly sense of what is going on out there. I mean, there's a lot that doesn't make it in the newsletter because we're trying to give a balance and a range of things. But from those news feeds that we watch, we can start to pick up patterns about things going on, trends going on in the business, outside the business that are important, like what's happening in China and any firm invested in China, what's going on with the real estate and construction economy over there. If you are working in China, you may want to be more cautious than you've been in the past, and so forth. So that's a really great way that we learn about stuff.
All right. Amy, you're up.
Okay, so I actually got a question here on a sticky note from somebody in the office.
A little closer.
Do you have a favorite font?
Do I have a favorite font? It's actually the one that is written in, Amy. It is. Well, no. I do have a favorite font. Of our fonts that we use, I really love Gotham. I think it's modern, it's clean, it's very straightforward. It tracks really well, so you can open it up, which is really nice. And I'm not the art director. We have an excellent art director, Chris McKee, and as well as, let me just say real quick, an excellent senior editor in Jennifer Root, an excellent staff writer in Kat Katzma, and a superb copy editor in Lisa Schultz. And we are looking for a managing editor currently, if I could get that out there. But anyway, I am not an art director, but I really love the versatility of Gotham, and it's just simple beauty. But we chose the 4 fonts for the magazines. We chose 3 at first. We chose Gridneck, Scala, and Din at first, to keep the palette pretty limited and pretty quiet, and we rarely venture outside of that. Because if there's one thing magazines suffer from, it's creep in design, and I can name a couple magazines that I get every month that look pretty creepy, like they're creeping. And then you look at something like the New Yorker, where it's basically in the same format it's been in for decades and decades, and it still looks beautiful, highly readable every week.
Mm-hmm. So you brought up the redesign. So since you took over, it was pretty major design. Won
wait, let me stop you. You're going
magazine awards.
Can I back you up?
Any better now?
Yeah, better now.
Okay, yeah. So since you took over, you mentioned the redesign. The magazine went through a major redesign in your tenure here, which won multiple magazine awards. Where do you see, so you've been there 6 years, where do you see the magazine progressing in the next 6 years or even longer?
Great question, because I kind of got everything I wanted to get done in my first 5 years for the first 5 years. And now I'm on a second 5-year plan, and I'll probably have a third 5-year plan with any luck. But it's a great question. Where we are really weak, and I will admit it up front, is we need more intake about practice, office practice, daily practice, at all levels of a firm or a design office, which we've started to do. Jennifer in particular has been really good, and we've started a new section called Office, which we hope to make quite regular, where we just take one question, one kind of a discrete, definable question in practice, and have a few firms answer it, because I think they know best, and we just let them pretty much do the talking. Construction is another area. We show a lot of details. We love the details. We know people love to see construction drawings, the documentation, the ideation from the very beginning, from the sketch to the finished dimension drawing. But what we really need is regular coverage of materials and methods, which, believe me, if you notice that missing, you are absolutely correct. We've had it a couple times, I mean just a couple, in 6 years, where it really sang, where it was only about that. Linda Jewell, professor at Berkeley, wrote for a number of years, a couple decades ago, about materials and methods. I believe when Grady Clay was the editor here. People loved that column, and I know why they loved it. It was good, and I know they crave that information. I've had almost no luck finding, and again, we have only so much bandwidth with 6 people. We are, I always say, we are we're a little magazine trying to act like a big one. And so there's always a lot more we want to do than we're able to do. But Linda did that column very well for a number of years, and I would like to find that sweet spot, a person who can write knowledgeably about construction materials and methods, and try to figure out how to carve those pieces. We've also tried to beef up we're trying to beef up our coverage on technology, just frankly digital technology and all the things it enables in the design process, but also in the world, like in terms of kind of the responsive city, I think people refer to it a lot, so that it becomes part of the metabolism of an environment, particularly in urban areas, but so that you can check the performance, monitor the performance of a landscape as it settles in seasons and through time to make sure it's doing what it was intended to do. I don't think everything needs to be measured, but I think that it's a really exciting ability to measure certain qualities in the environment to make sure you're getting done what you set out to do. That's 3: practice, technology, and construction. Those are the big 3. I'm gonna, and then we are always looking for people who have never been in the magazine before to join us and let us cover them. But again, I can't say it enough. We have to know you're out there and that you have something you want to share with us.
How do you find your writers, and if someone was interested in writing, what do they do?
Please write me a note. We find writers, a few different ways. Most of our best writers, frankly, come through referrals or people I've spotted writing elsewhere whom I really wanted to get on and recruit to join to the magazine as contributors. Some of our best writers have been working with the magazine for years, like Jane Roy Brown has been a longtime contributor. George Hazelrig, rest in peace, he was a great contributor for years. Frank Martin as well. Frank's still alive. But then, to solve certain problems, like in coverage of sciences, for a while we had a great guy I found through a friend, Arthur Allen. Now we have Arthur Allen's friend, because Arthur now works at Politico, so we have a good friend of his he referred me to, Philip Walsh, who is just terrific. He's a triple threat. He's an accountant, he's a writer, and he's an historian. And so he just does wonderful stories. And then, we rarely put out an ad saying we want writers, but we tell the profession every chance, because we would get a lot of people, frankly, who might not be suited to writing the pretty highly specialized stuff that landscape architecture involves.
Right.
But we will look at people most closely with environmental writing experience, writing in the sciences, writing about design. However, I have been disappointed in how architectural expertise transfers to landscape, which is to say not very well. I know I basically felt like I was starting from scratch with my own design knowledge. I know, a good deal about how a design profession works, but really I was much more starting from scratch than I expected entering this field. And then we get, I had a guy write me, he's a brand new graduate from the GSD, and he wrote me 2 days ago to say that he had a really, really cool project he's embarking on, and would we be willing to look at working with him on writing about it when he's done. And the project was so good and just so well articulated and so fascinating. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I don't want to jinx it, but all he had to do was reach out. It was a really strong idea. We'll even work with a semi-strong idea and see if it's got something that maybe you're not telling us. That we can help kind of develop the idea. But again, you got to pick up the keyboard and let us know.
All right. Let's over to Chelsea.
Okay, so every creative understands the occasional experience of getting writer's block.
Yeah.
So what is your favorite trick to get past it?
A nice walk, actually. It's really hard to write when you're trying to write. I mean, sometimes you're on a roll, and you know the story's kind of telling itself, and it's just kind of coming out. But I've had many times where you just can't get from one paragraph to the other, or you can't open up the thing. And as my good friend Brett says, once you get the lead down, the rest, kind of solves itself. I mean, it's true and not all the time, but I find there's nothing like going away and not trying to write for a little while, whether it's 20 minutes or a couple hours or a day if you have time, to just get away and expand your mind. Often it's just your mind is just too contracted to upon itself to get the words out. That is usually the problem with writer's block, and you're trying too hard to hit the bullseye and not enough free thinking. Good question, though.
That brings a follow-up question to that. So when you get outside and take a break to get over that, where do you go when you need a break? What do you do?
Me. I myself, I live a block from Rock Creek Park here in Washington, which is like having a 2,000-acre farm that you don't have to mow. It's really great. It's actually in the District of Columbia. It's about 1,700 acres, and it's mainly I guess second or third growth, but it's mainly forest. And as dense as Washington is, there's often almost no one in it. And so I like to get my dog, and he always likes to go, and my partner often, or one of us goes alone, and just go down in the woods and watch the creek run and listen to the wind and do very little else.
Sounds wonderful.
It is.
All right, Amy, you have a question?
Yes, I do. So, with you guys being inside all of these stories all the time, you see a lot of trends going on. What do you see that is on the horizon? What do you think is next for landscape architecture?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, I know resilience is a really big one. I know I don't know if it's next so much as it is now, but I think that that's a big set of problems that still needs working out, and people are working really hard on it on all fronts to talk about climate extremes, climate change. There is a lot of that work going on both in the heartland and on the coasts to make sure that if we are going to build in places that may prove a hazard at some point, that we do it defensively and defensively. But what's next? I mean, I think also along with resilience, I think equity, social equity is a really big one now. It's come up faster and is on the lips of more people than I might have ever imagined, because it's always been an issue, but now that it's really stark. I do think looking at rural areas could stand more attention in our business. And we do a lot of urbanism, a whole lot of urbanism, and I love it. I love cities. I grew up loving the city. I probably will never live primarily outside of a city that I can think of, but I do think there are these huge areas that have gone overlooked in our nation and in the world that are areas where there may be ways to put people to work who don't have work, that may be based in what land was or what land could be. Whether there's a lot, like take mining for instance. I mean, we've got a lot of coal miners who are going to be out of work, and what are they going to do? Like it was a land-based profession. It was based on the earth, and they were where they were, working where they were because of the resource available that provided the jobs. But I think that I don't think it's just this campaign, the presidential campaign, but I think the campaign has really brought out a lot of issues about economic disenfranchisement, and I think we can see it in the social trends, the social isolation we're seeing in the pathology of society in the opiate epidemic, in trends where certain groups of people are experiencing higher death rates in the middle class, where there's a problem going on. And I think it's an economic problem and may call for some sort of unified, diverse solution to restoring livelihood, good old livelihood, to places where, you know, time is just passing them by at this point, and not in a good way. But that's really vague, I know, but that's all I can say. I hope it's next.
That's great. We have time for one final question.
I can't believe it's been 55 minutes already.
I know, time flies. All right, so this one, Landscape Architecture Magazine, obviously is a branch or a part of ASLA.
Yeah.
But how much oversight do you have, and how much autonomy do you have in editorial content? And you know, what is the editorial board? What does that look like?
I'm going to say respectfully 90% autonomy, which, okay, so we are part of ASLA, and we keep that fact very much in mind with everything we do. We're obviously, we set our own agenda editorially. We have an advisory committee of members of ASLA. It's about, right now I think it's about 15 or 16 professionals, and Chelsea Keith, there on your screen, is a member of that committee as our student representative. We have a call once a month and they are free to obviously contact us at any time, where they just give us the weather report on practice and what they think is important for the magazine to cover, ways to cover it. We get a diverse range of perspectives from those people. That group turns over about a third every year, and we bring on new members who volunteer to be on the committee. But our main policies are set by the ASLA Board of Trustees, and well, the policies are approved by the ASLA Board of Trustees, and basically their main mandate to us is to show excellent design and practice in landscape architecture. That's as simple and as complex as it gets, both. But otherwise, I have a wonderful boss, Nancy Somerville, the CEO of ASLA. But as with the other departments that Nancy oversees, she has no interest in micromanaging any of us, and we're all expected to be pretty much self-cleaning ovens, I would say.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's fun.
Do you have any final closing words? Any message for students, emerging professionals?
Well, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank you for joining us today, and I also want to encourage you to either be members or remain members of ASLA, and not just to keep my salary coming, but because every professional group of concerned professionals, whether you're journalists or designers or actuaries or dentists, you need to advocate from a strong position for the best way to do your job. So although it may seem like it's a big leap from what you do to what ASLA does, when you're talking about writing a check for several $100s for membership, ASLA works really hard. The people down the hall, particularly in membership and government affairs and education, work to keep the systems that hold together landscape architecture as a profession in place and keep them ironclad. So not least that would be licensure is the biggest one, because now there is licensure in all 50 states, and soon I hope in the District of Columbia, that ensures that not just anybody can come along and start manipulating land in a big way and resources in a big way and earn money for it. That is reserved for people with the education and training to be landscape architects, and it's enforced through a license. And if now with licensure in all 50 states, if you lose it in one of those states, that state, those designers become persona non grata in other states, because wherever you go in this country, you're required to have a license. If you want to go overseas, that's a different story. But you know, like the recent near miss in Arizona was pretty scary, because Arizona designers would have been without portfolio professionally if they tried to go work in Colorado or New Mexico or, you know, Maine or Texas. That's it.
All right.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Very, very much, Brad, for joining us. It was very informative.
I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. And thank you, Chelsea and Amy, for helping out today.
Thanks, Chelsea, and thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
All
I
right.
want to remind all of our viewers that second Thursday of every month we will be doing these, and we've got some exciting ones coming up.
Who do you got coming up? Tell us.
June 9th is Shannon Nichols from
All right.
Nichols.
We're big fans.
And July 14th, Laura Solano from Michael Van
Great.
Valkenburg.
Awesome.
And August 11th, David Rubin from
All
Lansing.
right. It will be great.
Yeah, so we've got some exciting times coming up. Remember, these are all stored on YouTube, so tell your friends to go and watch it. There's a lot of valuable information that I'm sure everyone can enjoy. So thank you for joining us, everybody.
Back sometime. All right.
Have a wonderful day.